On April 6, 1994, a Dassault Falcon 50 jet preparing to land in Kigali, Rwanda was shot down fatally with a surface-to-air missile, killing everyone on board. The passengers were not just a bunch of wealthy individuals, but included Rwanda's President Juvenal Habyarimana and Burundian President Cyprien Ntaryamira, both from the majority ethnic group, Hutu. This would mark the beginning of a 3-month-long heightened tension between the Hutus and Tutsis. The Hutus saw this as an attempt to turn the tides of power in favor of the Tutsis, which would lead to a full-blown chaos.
25 years ago, over the course of just 100 days, about 800,000 people were slaughtered in Rwanda by ethnic Hutu extremists.
One of the most influential and wealthy men accused of playing a key role in inciting the genocide was businessman Felicien Kabuga, who would be on the run for 26 years, evading the FBI, Interpol, and multiple authorities. This is the story of the hunt of Africa's most wanted man. The conflict between the Hutus and Tutsis did not actually start after the assassination of their president, but had been there since the Belgian colonial rule in the early 1900s. The Belgians favored Tutsis over the Hutus, despite the fact that Tutsis only made up 20% of Rwanda's population. However, during their fight for independence in the 1950s, the Hutus won the government, which led them to massacre Tutsis and force them to flee the country in fear of being killed. The Tutsis would not be included in the government until August 1993, when President Habyarimana signed an agreement for the creation of a transition government that included Tutsi-led party, Rwandan Patriotic Front. This power-sharing agreement was heavily opposed by Hutu extremists who viewed this as a threat to Hutu dominance. They began spreading propaganda claiming the Tutsis were plotting to take over the government and re-establish Tutsi rule in Rwanda. With the death of their president, this narrative would only intensify, reaching all corners of the country and resulting in further chaos. Radio Télévision Libre de Mille Colina, or RTLM, filled Rwanda's airwaves with such messages, promoting hate. Young and old Hutus were glued to their radios, carrying them everywhere as they listened to good music interspersed with hate-filled messages urging violence. This radio station was owned by wealthy businessman Felicien Kabuga, among others, and was instrumental in fueling the genocide. Their message was aimed at instilling fear among Hutus. They would repeatedly call the Tutsis cockroaches.
Vraiment, et vous les IND, vous n'êtes pas des Rwandais.
This would turn fear into hatred and willingness to exterminate the Tutsis. Members of the Hutu clan were now not only carrying radios. On one arm they had their radios and on the other, machetes. Disclaimer: this section of the video might be disturbing for some. Viewer discretion is advised. You can skip to the next timestamp provided. As all this tension was building up, Felicien Kabuga began recruiting and throwing funds at the recruitment of Hutu militia men called the Interahamwe. I had previously mentioned that Hutus were working with machetes. What I forgot to mention was that these machetes were brand new, shipped from overseas courtesy of Felicien Kabuga, who funded their purchase and distribution. While this was taking place, RTLM successfully played on the anger and hatred towards the Tutsis, and from April 1994, the genocide against the Tutsis began. Neighbors turned on their own, friends turned against each other, and worst of all, family members turned on other family members. The Interahamwe went from house to house looking for Tutsis to end. They set up roadblocks around the country, stopping everyone and forcing them to show their identity cards in order to identify Tutsis attempting to flee. All Tutsi women and young girls found would be right before this militia brutally unalived them. Even with all this happening, Felicien Kabuga and his fellow extremists had not had enough of this. RTLM, being the most listened to local station at the time, would broadcast the hiding places of Tutsis and would encourage people to find them and eliminate them. Anyone who refused to participate in the genocide was also a target. Few months before the genocide had begun, some government officials had summoned the RTLM board of directors, headed by Felicien Kabuga. One of these officials was the Minister of Information, Faustin Rukugoza. The board was questioned on the rise of anti-Tutsi messages across their radio station, which was seen as an attempt at inciting a genocide. And Faustin Rukugoza demanded that they cease from spreading such messages. As you already know, Felicien Kabuga cared less for these demands. This meeting ultimately made Faustin Rukugoza a target, and on 7th April 1994, he and his family were found in his house and were brutally murdered for being Hutu radicals. In just 100 days, the genocide had claimed an estimate of 800,000 to 1 million lives and would only end after the RPF, led by the current president Paul Kagame, and Tutsi rebels arrived from Uganda to Kigali to stop the genocide. They began by bombing all RTLM broadcast centers, forcing all the genocide perpetrators to flee the country. They took over the government and began a massive hunt for perpetrators and were successful in apprehending some. However, Felicien Kabuga's whereabouts were unknown. His trail had gone cold, as if he had been erased from existence. During this period, all countries including the United States government avoided involving themselves in stopping the genocide or the hunt for the genocide perpetrators. But this would change 5 years after the end of the genocide. In March 1999, a group of Western tourists, while exploring Bwindi National Park in Uganda, were attacked by Hutu militiamen hiding in the region. 8 of the tourists were killed, and among them were 2 American citizens. This was done as a form of revenge for the perceived involvement of the American government in ending the genocide. The American government, which had distanced itself from hunting down the fugitives, had now taken the front seat, with Felicien Kabuga being their main focus.
A massive car bomb exploded outside of a large federal building in downtown Oklahoma City.
If we can clone a sheep, many asked, why not a human being?
Today, the clear winner of the Russian presidential election, Vladimir Putin, began to establish the Putin era.
As I recall, that said wanted, dead or alive.
In 2002, Felicien Kabuga's name had showed up in company registers around Kenya's capital, Nairobi, confirming his presence in the country. From this information, the United States government held a press conference in Nairobi. It was broadcast around the region, giving out a list of genocide perpetrators that they had successfully identified and were ready to hunt down. But the main focus of the press conference was to reveal their suspicion of Felicien Kabuga's presence in Kenya, and they put a $5 million reward for anyone who gave information that could lead to the arrest of Kabuga. The Kenyan government, headed by President Daniel Toroitich arap Moi, also played a role in this press conference, promising to use all available resources to find and apprehend Felicien Kabuga.
The Kenyan authorities have spared no effort whatsoever, if that person is in Kenya, in getting him apprehended and dealt with.
But this was just talk. The Moi government were allegedly aware of Felicien Kabuga's presence in the country and were aiding him in evading arrest while allowing him to continue conducting business. Honestly speaking, as a Kenyan citizen, I am not at all shocked. Let's go back to the $5 million reward. This is a lot of money. If converted to Kenyan shillings at the time, it would be over 400 million Kenyan shillings. And if you guessed that it wouldn't take long before someone came forward with information about Kabuga's whereabouts, you were right. 27-year-old businessman and journalist William Munuhe had information about Kabuga's whereabouts and was ready to earn the easiest $5 million of his life. In early January 2003, a few months after the press conference, William Munuhe approached the US Embassy in Nairobi offering information about the whereabouts of Felicien Kabuga. The FBI was skeptical. Of course, it's $5 million on the line. So they did a polygraph test on him and he passed. This was not enough for the FBI to believe him. William Munuhe, being a businessman, had connections with certain government officials who had direct associations with Kabuga. So he mentioned one man who is still unknown to the public. The FBI summoned him and also did a polygraph test on this man, and he failed. This made them believe Munuhe's claims, and they agreed to work together to capture Kabuga. Through his connections, William was to lure Kabuga to his residence in the suburbs of Nairobi under the pretense of a business meeting on January 5, 2003. Kabuga, being a businessman, was likely to show up for the meeting since it was being held inside an associate's house. There was nothing to worry about. Upon his arrival, the Kenyan and US security agents, including the FBI positioned nearby, would arrest him. Their plan was simple, perhaps too simple. Kabuga did not appear at the scheduled time, and attempts to contact Munuhe were unsuccessful. After 2 days of Munuhe's silence, the authorities were concerned and entered his house. They, unfortunately, found him shot dead on his bed, surrounded by a pool of his own blood. Upon inspection of the crime scene, evidence suggested that he had been murdered to prevent the capture of Kabuga. Surprisingly, no autopsy was done, and the Kenyan authorities claimed that Munuhe had died from a carbon monoxide poisoning. I am not an expert, but I don't think that carbon monoxide would cause anyone to bleed out that much. I don't think YouTube would allow me to show the amount of blood that was in the house, but just know it was a lot of blood. After this, Kabuga's trail went cold again. Unfortunately, this would be the closest the FBI or anyone would get to capturing Kabuga.
A massive earthquake struck in the Indian Ocean and triggered a series of giant waves,
slammed into 14 countries, claiming more than 220,000 lives.
Voters have chosen our first African-American president, Bob Schieffer.
Over the years, it was reported that he could be hiding in Europe. In June 2008, a Norwegian-based blogger reported that Kabuga was hiding in Oslo and might be planning to turn himself in. However, authorities dismissed this claim as a hoax. In the same month, on June 14th, a local news channel in Kenya, KTN, reported that Kabuga had been arrested and was being held at a police station in Nairobi. Later, the suspect was found to be a local university lecturer and not Kabuga.
Now, the most wanted man in Rwanda and suspected genocide mastermind Felicien Kabuga has been arrested.
Accused of funding militias that massacred over 800,000 people in Rwanda during the 1994 genocide.
After a long hunt for Africa's most wanted man, the French authorities, IRMCT, Interpol and Rwandan authorities had finally gotten the exact hiding place of Kabuga. The now 87-year-old fugitive was residing in an apartment in Agnac-sur-Seine near Paris. And on May 16, 2020, the police arrested Kabuga. The operation details on how they were able to track down Kabuga are yet to be fully revealed. But after scouring the internet, I came across an interesting theory that made sense to me, but is yet to be confirmed by authorities that worked to capture Kabuga. Kabuga had successfully evaded arrest for over 25 years by relying on loyal associates, but without his family, he would have been in custody long before 2020. His children were his closest allies, managing his finances, transacting on his behalf, and ensuring that their father's whereabouts remained unknown. And they did an impressive job. But even with careful maneuvering, one of his sons made an insignificant move that would prove to be a big mistake. He accessed a bank account linked to Kabuga's past, one that investigators had flagged years earlier during their search for financial patterns associated with the fugitive. This action sent a red flag, immediately alerting investigators. While it may have seemed like an insignificant action to the son, it gave the investigators the breakthrough they needed. By surveilling the entire family's movement, the investigators began to notice patterns that led them to an apartment in Paris where one of the sons was residing. After watching the apartment for a while, they noticed an elderly man living in the same apartment. And on May 16, 2020, at about 5:30 a.m., French police raided the apartment and found Kabuga inside, marking the end of the hunt for Africa's most wanted man. In my own personal opinion, Felicien Kabuga is much worse if compared to most high-profile criminals. The effects of his actions, even though took place 3 decades ago, can still be felt in Rwanda. Most children and adults had to live with the horrors of witnessing their family members and strangers being killed in cold blood, while others being burnt alive by individuals they knew and had to live with for the rest of their lives. Thank you for watching this video and consider subscribing so that you can watch and enjoy videos like this in the future. Goodbye.